My adopted daughter landed a summer internship in another state. Then she told me not to show up at the airport because her birth father would be there. I stayed home, heartbroken. But 3 days later, what happened was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to William Gray from New York, USA. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I still remember the first time I saw her, barely 6 years old, hair a tangled halo of curls, eyes too old for her tiny face. She didn't cry when the social worker handed her over to me. She just clutched a beat-up stuffed rabbit and stared at me like she was waiting for the next disappointment. I bent down, smiled, and said, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your new mom." And she blinked slowly, like she didn't believe me. That night, she refused to sleep in the bed I'd set up with fresh sheets and a handmade quilt. She curled up in the corner of the room, rabbit in her arms, and stayed awake until dawn. I stayed up with her. That was the start. Every ounce of love I gave her, I gave freely, without expectation. Every school drop-off, every night she crawled into my bed after a bad dream, every birthday party where I invited the whole class just so she wouldn't feel forgotten. I did it all because I was her mother, not the woman who gave birth to her. Me. Raising her wasn't easy. There were years when the trauma spoke louder than she did. Tantrums that lasted hours, therapy appointments that felt like walking through fire. But there were also sweet moments. She'd crawl into my lap, just because. She'd draw pictures of me and mommy, with hearts and glitter glue. Once, in the 3rd grade, she stood up during show and tell and said, "My mom saved me." I excused myself to the bathroom and cried quietly in a stall. I thought we had something unshakable, something that wasn't built on biology but on trust and time and all the invisible stitches of motherhood. She called me mom. Not adoptive mom, not stepmom, just mom. And I wore that name like a badge, like a title I had fought for and earned. I thought it meant something unbreakable. God, I was so wrong. When she got into that internship, some prestigious environmental research position in Oregon, I was over the moon. I told everyone I knew. Neighbors, co-workers, the barista at my favorite coffee shop. I even bought her a brand new carry-on suitcase and a folder with all her travel documents neatly organized. She laughed and rolled her eyes, but I could tell she appreciated it. Or maybe I just told myself she did. Either way, I was planning to drive her to the airport, give her a tight hug, and maybe cry a little as I watched her walk away toward her next big chapter. But 2 days before her flight, while we were folding laundry together in the living room, she said it. So casually, it nearly slipped past me. "Hey, don't worry about coming to the airport. My bio dad's gonna be there." I paused, a sock in each hand, heart thudding in my chest. "Your bio dad?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Since when is he back in the picture?" She didn't even look up. "We've been talking for a while. I invited him to come. Figured it'd be good to spend some time together before the program starts." And then she added, as if it were the most logical thing in the world, "It'd probably be weird to have you both there, you know?" I couldn't breathe. It was like the air had turned to cement. I felt myself nodding, because what else could I do? But inside, my whole chest cracked open. Weird. I raised her. I stayed when he left. I was the one who dealt with night terrors and report cards and heartbreaks. And now I was too weird to be part of her departure? I smiled. I nodded. I told her, "Okay, sweetie. Whatever makes you comfortable." And then I went into the kitchen and gripped the counter until the tears stopped. The morning of her flight, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, watching the minutes tick by. I almost texted her, almost called, but I didn't want to be that mom, the clingy one who couldn't let go. Instead, I watched her location blip on Life 360, saw her reach the airport, saw her leave. I stared at the empty house, the suitcase-shaped dent in the carpet where her bag had been, and I felt like a ghost. She didn't call to say she landed safely. Didn't send a photo. I checked her Instagram an hour later. She had already posted a story. Her and her birth father, grinning at the airport Starbucks, arms slung around each other like they'd never skipped a beat. I didn't know whether to scream or vomit. My friends tried to be kind. She's just exploring her roots, one said. Don't take it personally, said another. Easy for them to say. They didn't spend 2 decades sewing someone else's soul to their own only to be told it wasn't enough. I kept my pain to myself, smiling when people asked how she was doing. Great, I'd say. Really thriving. But inside, I felt like I'd been left behind, discarded. Not with malice, no. Just with the casual indifference that hurts worse than hate. Like I was a childhood phase she'd outgrown. And that quiet, seeping pain, it lingered. It followed me from the kitchen to the grocery store to the empty seat across from me at dinner. That's what love without reciprocation feels like. It hollows you out slowly. But I didn't say a word to her. I gave her space, kept my pride, and told myself she'd come back around. Maybe she needed to test the waters with him. Maybe she'd realize I was her real anchor, her true home. Maybe. That hope, small and humiliating, kept me from texting her that first night. I sat by my phone anyway, watched the screen light up a few times. But it was never her. Just spam emails and weather alerts. Eventually, I turned off the ringer and went to bed. But sleep didn't come. 3 days. That's how long it took before I heard from her again. And it wasn't a call. It was a notification, my bank alerting me that someone had tried to use my credit card at a hotel in Eugene. I froze. Checked the transaction. It was her city. Her name was on the attempted charge. Apparently, she needed help with her deposit. No call. No message. Just tried to use my card like I was still her invisible safety net. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. I didn't cancel the card out of spite. I canceled it because the truth had finally landed. If I wasn't good enough to be part of her life, I sure as hell wasn't good enough to fund it. The silence after I canceled that card was almost worse than the rejection at the airport. It was heavy, thicker than the walls of this house, stretching into every room like smoke after a fire. I expected an immediate call, maybe even a text, something that at least acknowledged what happened. But nothing came. Just the dull echo of a decision I made with trembling hands and a sick stomach. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because something inside me, the part that had been shrinking for years, finally stood up and said, enough. But that didn't stop me from feeling like I'd just burned down my own house with both of us still inside. I kept refreshing my bank app, just to be sure the charge hadn't gone through, as if some part of me still hoped it had, that I'd helped her, even after she pushed me away. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, staring at my phone, rereading our last text exchange from a week ago. It was nothing special, just a simple good luck. So proud of you, followed by her thumbs up reaction. That was it. No heart. No thank you. Not even a love you. But I remember crafting that message like it was a final exam, rereading it 10 times before hitting send, wanting it to be the perfect mix of support and warmth without sounding needy. And for what? A thumbs up? Now, looking at it again, it felt like I had been talking to a stranger. Someone who didn't remember the nights I rocked her to sleep or held her while she sobbed about being the only kid in class without a baby picture from birth. Someone who forgot how I used to stand outside her therapy sessions, wringing my hands and wondering if I was enough. I kept thinking back to the early years, when she still used to reach for my hand in public. Back when she was maybe 11 or 12, and some other kid at school told her she wasn't really my daughter because we didn't look alike. I found her crying in the bathroom that night, and I told her, blood doesn't make a mother. Showing up does. And she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. Back then, she believed that. We believed that. But now it felt like she was chasing something else, something shinier, more mysterious. A man who hadn't raised her, but had suddenly reappeared with nothing but his last name and some emotional curiosity, and that was enough for her to put me on the sidelines. No explanations, no conversations, just a quiet rearranging of the cast list in her life story. And I wasn't the lead anymore. I was barely a footnote. I couldn't talk about it with just anyone. My closest friend, Sharon, came over that afternoon after I called and said, "I'm not okay," in the smallest voice I've ever used. She brought pastries and sympathy, sat across from me in my living room, and listened without interruption. When I told her everything, about the airport, the blocked credit card, the complete silence, she winced. "That's brutal," she said softly. "But you had every right to cancel it." You're not a bank. You're her mother, not her backup plan. I nodded, but her words didn't reach all the way in. Because deep down, I didn't want to be right. I just wanted to matter. She's 20, not 12, Sharon added gently. If she wants a relationship with her birth father, fine. But she doesn't get to sideline you and still expect access to your wallet. I appreciated her loyalty, but hearing it out loud felt like confirming the final diagnosis. This was real. I hadn't misread it. My daughter, had decided I wasn't part of her new life. Not in the ways that mattered. And yet she still felt entitled to the benefits of my love, without the actual connection. Like a subscription she didn't want to cancel because she still enjoyed the perks. Later that night, I scrolled through her Instagram stories again, hoping, foolishly, that she might have reached out. Nothing. But one post caught my eye. It was a mirror selfie in her hotel room, with the caption, "Finally settled in. Excited for this chapter." No mention of the card. No hint of stress. Just that same curated, filtered ease. And then I saw a comment beneath it. From him. The birth father. "Proud of you, kiddo. You're gonna do great things." She responded with a heart emoji. That was when I set my phone down and walked into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the tub and let myself cry. Really cry, for the first time in days. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the realization that she didn't even feel conflicted about it. Like I was a past chapter she had already closed. In the middle of my breakdown, my phone buzzed again. I wiped my face, half hoping it was her. Maybe an apology, even just a hey. But it wasn't. It was another fraud alert from my bank. This time for an online order she had apparently tried to place with my Amazon account. I felt my jaw clench, my body go rigid. She still hadn't reached out directly. Still hadn't explained, hadn't asked, hadn't even acknowledged the tension. And yet here she was, trying again, trying to access me without facing me. That's when I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. I was no longer a mother in her eyes. I was a resource, a fallback. I went to my computer and started changing passwords. Amazon, Uber, Netflix, everything. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. It felt like putting up a fence after years of leaving the door wide open. It hurt. God, it hurt. But it also felt like claiming a piece of myself I'd let go of long ago. The part of me that knew love wasn't meant to be used like a credit card. I wasn't a line of credit with a human face. I was her mother. And if she didn't want that part of me, then she didn't get the rest either. That night, I cooked dinner for one. I poured a glass of wine, lit a candle, and sat at the table where we used to eat together every night. I stared at the empty chair across from me, and I didn't cry. Not this time. Because I knew, for the first time in a long while, that I was doing the right thing. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. I couldn't make her choose me, but I could choose myself. It was 3 days after the second failed charge when she showed up. No call, no text, just a knock on the door that sounded too familiar, too sharp, like she was still entitled to enter without warning. I was in the middle of folding laundry, my hands deep in a pile of towels, trying to do something, anything, that felt normal. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, part of me wanted to fold her into a hug like I always had. She looked tired, sunburned across the nose, and annoyed. But mostly annoyed. Her arms were crossed, her suitcase on the front step behind her, and her face already mid-frown like she'd walked up rehearsing her argument the entire way. "You canceled the card?" she said before even stepping inside. Not hi. Not can we talk. Not even my name, let alone mom. I leaned against the doorframe and nodded. Yes, I did. Her eyes widened with disbelief, like I'd just slapped her. Why? I needed that deposit. I couldn't check in, and I had to borrow money from someone I barely know. I let the silence sit between us, hot and awkward, like a weight neither of us wanted to carry. I watched her, really watched her, this woman who had once been my little girl. And what struck me most was that she looked so unfamiliar. Older, colder, less like the child I raised, and more like someone trying to play a role she didn't quite believe in. And maybe that's what hurt the most, how easily she'd slipped into this new version of herself, where I was no longer part of the picture unless it was financially convenient. I canceled it, I said slowly, because I realized something. If I'm not good enough to be in your life, at the airport, in your photos, in your day-to-day, then I'm not good enough to fund it either. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's not fair, she said finally. You're being dramatic. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that surprised even me. Dramatic? You told me not to come to the airport because your birth father would be there. Do you know how that felt? Do you have any idea what that did to me? She rolled her eyes and shifted her weight. I didn't want it to be awkward, okay? I'm trying to build something with him. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. I stared at her for a moment, letting that sink in, the staggering audacity of it. Trying to build something with him doesn't require tearing me down in the process, I said. You didn't just exclude me. You didn't even give me the decency of a conversation. You made a decision about who got to be real family in that moment, and I wasn't it. She sighed, exasperated, like I was the one making this difficult. I just didn't want drama. Then maybe you shouldn't have started by lying through omission, I snapped. My voice cracked, and I hated that. Hated that even now, I couldn't keep the emotion out of my throat. You used my card without asking. You ignored me for days. And when I finally draw a line, you come back angry like I broke your heart. We stood there, staring at each other, the years stretching and fraying between us. For a moment, I saw her face shift, just a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But she buried it quickly. You're just mad because you couldn't control everything this time, she muttered. That hit harder than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it was so far from the truth, it was laughable. Control. I repeated, do you think this is about control? I let you walk away. I respected your decision, even when it gutted me. But respecting your autonomy doesn't mean I have to bankroll your choices. There's a difference between support and servitude, and I won't confuse the two anymore. She looked down, her jaw clenched tight, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she picked up her suitcase and stood a little straighter. I guess I shouldn't have come, she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was full of shards, so much grief packed into one moment that I thought I might choke on it. But I held it in. I didn't reach for her. Didn't offer a compromise. Because that's what I always did. I bent. I softened. I gave. But this time I didn't. I stayed still, stayed silent, and watched as she turned around and walked back down the driveway, her wheels bumping over the cracks in the pavement like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence I never wanted to write. I closed the door slowly, feeling the air shift as it latched behind me. And then I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, the place I used to sit when she'd come home from school and tell me about her day. I remembered brushing glitter out of her hair after art class, tying her shoes before we left for the zoo, helping her memorize lines for the school play where she played a tree and was somehow still the star. I thought about every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night, every time I bit my tongue so she could find her own voice. And now, that voice was telling me I was replaceable. Later that night, I poured another glass of wine, something stronger than I usually drink, and sat on the porch. The wind had picked up. Autumn was starting to whisper its way through the trees, the first chill in the air a reminder that change was coming whether I was ready or not. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. And I thought, maybe this is what parenting adult children looks like. Not the celebrations or the visits home for the holidays, but the reckoning, the painful shift where love meets limits, and you have to decide which one will define you. And I chose limits, not because I stopped loving her, but because I started loving myself again. The fallout didn't come right away. At first, there was just quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think maybe you imagined the whole thing, like your pain isn't real unless someone else is there to witness it. For a few days after she left, I moved around the house like I was underwater. The kettle whistled too loud. The clock ticked too slow. The sound of her footsteps, etched into the wood floors from years of stomping up and down in frustration or joy, echoed in my mind like some kind of phantom pain. And yet, nothing came. No calls. No texts. Just the familiar sting of being forgotten, this time sharpened by confrontation and a slammed door. Then Sharon called again. She always knew when to check in. Not too soon, not too late, like she had some sixth sense for emotional timing. You okay? She asked. I paused before answering, mostly because I didn't know how to define okay anymore. I told her what happened on the porch, the way my daughter had shown up angry, said her piece, and left again. I told her about the part that hurt most. Not the shouting, not even the blame, but the sheer absence of want. My daughter didn't want to understand me. She didn't want to be close. She just wanted the benefits of closeness without the work. Sharon listened quietly until I got to the end, then exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. "You did the right thing," she said softly, but then added, "But I know that doesn't make it hurt less." It didn't. Not at all. Especially when the ripple effects started to hit. The first came from my cousin Trisha, who lived 2 towns over and only called when something was wrong or juicy. "Hey," she said with forced cheerfulness. "So, I didn't want to bring this up, but have you seen what your daughter posted?" I hadn't. I hadn't looked. I thought I was protecting myself by staying offline, by creating a little bubble of peace around my pain. But apparently, that bubble had already burst. Trisha read it to me aloud, and with every word, I felt my face flush like I was standing naked in the middle of the street. It wasn't direct. Of course it wasn't. But it didn't need to be. Nothing like being punished for setting boundaries. Some people only love you when they're in control. Don't let guilt trap you. Family should lift you up, not cut you off. That was the caption. Underneath it, a photo of her and her birth father at some hip-looking brunch spot, both smiling with mimosas in hand. I sat there, phone to my ear, heart thudding so loudly I couldn't even hear what Trisha was saying next. All I could think was, so that's the story she's telling. That I'm the villain. That I'm the controlling, manipulative mother who couldn't handle losing power. Not the woman who raised her. Not the mother who sacrificed sleep and money and dreams. Just the obstacle in her journey toward freedom. Sharon came over that night with wine and Thai food, and I showed her the post. She read it twice, then set the phone down and sighed. "That's low," she said. "Passive-aggressive and cruel. But honestly, I think it says more about her than it does about you." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But all I could think about were the people who didn't know the full story, friends, distant relatives, college classmates, who would see that post and assume I was exactly what she made me out to be. The overbearing adoptive mother trying to hold on to power instead of letting her daughter fly. And maybe that was the part that cut deepest, not the lie itself, but the idea that people would believe it without question. The next morning, I found myself composing a reply. Not on the post itself. I wasn't about to start a public war, but in a private message. I typed out a long, emotionally raw explanation. I told her how much I loved her, how devastated I was, how that post didn't just hurt my feelings. It rewrote our story in front of strangers. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, finger hovering over the send button. But I didn't send it. I deleted the whole thing, because I knew she wasn't ready to hear it. And I wasn't ready to beg for understanding from someone who wasn't offering any grace. That afternoon, my older brother stopped by. We don't see each other often, but he heard about the blow-up from Sharon, and he said he wanted to offer a neutral ear. I poured him coffee, and we sat on the porch like we used to during long summers as kids. He listened carefully as I recounted everything. Her showing up, the argument, the post, the silence that followed. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "You know, I think she's confused, maybe even lost. She's trying to figure out who she is, and reconnecting with her bio dad is part of that. But I also think she's being incredibly unfair to you." I appreciated his honesty, but what hit me hardest was the first part. She's trying to figure out who she is. I wanted to scream. I helped her become who she is. Every part of her, her resilience, her empathy, her sense of humor, was shaped inside my home, under my roof, with my love. And now she was acting like none of it ever happened. Like she'd just hatched fully formed at 20 years old and decided I was no longer relevant. "It's not just unfair," I told him quietly. "It's cruel." He nodded again, slower this time. "Maybe, but you don't have to carry the cruelty with you. That part's hers." I didn't say anything to that. I just looked out at the street, watching a neighbor's kid ride a bike up and down the sidewalk. He looked about 6, the age she was when I first brought her home. I wondered if his mom knew, really knew, how fragile that bond could be. How you could pour everything into someone and still be left with nothing but memories and an aching chest. That night, I took down all the photos of her in the hallway. Not out of spite, not to erase her, but because I couldn't stand the sight of them anymore. Each one felt like a lie, like a promise broken in hindsight. I wrapped them in bubble wrap and placed them gently in a storage bin, then put it in the closet. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, not deeply, but without waking up every hour to check my phone. Progress, I supposed. Her birthday came on a Thursday that year, tucked in the middle of a week I deliberately packed with errands, meetings, and any other excuse I could find to stay busy. I'd circled the date on the calendar months earlier, out of habit more than excitement. But when the day arrived, I woke up to silence. No balloons, no frantic gift wrapping, no text reminders from the bakery about her favorite lemon chiffon cake. Just the usual dull ache in my chest and the almost oppressive weight of doing nothing. For the first time in over a decade, I hadn't sent anything. No card, no flowers, not even a text. And that decision, as simple as it was, had felt like trying to hold my hand steady over an open flame. Because even though everything inside me screamed to reach out, to bridge the gap, I didn't. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window like I always did. I tried not to think about the year she turned 11, and I surprised her with a scavenger hunt that led to a pair of concert tickets and matching t-shirts. Or the time she was 16 and I drove 3 hours to a specialty bookstore just to get her the first edition of her favorite novel, which I had wrapped in tissue paper with a handwritten note inside that said, "To my favorite story." I tried not to think about those things, but they showed up anyway, uninvited ghosts hovering in the corner of my mind, reminding me of every moment when love had been enough. Back then, it always had been. Back then, she looked at me like I was home. I won't lie and pretend it didn't hurt like hell. Sitting there with my phone face down on the table, resisting the urge to type out something. Anything, just to let her know I remembered. But I knew how that would go. She'd either ignore it completely or send a half-hearted thanks that would leave me feeling even emptier than silence. I'd done that dance too many times already. And this year, I needed to do something different. I needed to make peace with the possibility that she might not come back, not the way I wanted her to. And that if she did, it had to be on different terms. My terms. By noon, I'd already been bombarded with reminders of her birthday from people who meant well but didn't know the full story. A text from an old friend. "Can't believe she's 21 today? You must be so proud." A comment on an old Facebook photo I'd forgotten to archive. These two. Such a bond. I didn't respond to any of it. I just sat in the quiet, letting the weight of what the day used to mean press down on my ribs like a bench press with no spotter. I went out for lunch just to get out of the house, picked at a salad I didn't want, and smiled politely when the waitress asked if I was celebrating anything special. I told her no. That was the truth in its rawest form. There was nothing to celebrate, not anymore. Later that evening, as the sun began to dip low and paint the sky in warm, orange streaks, I came home to find an envelope sticking out of my mailbox. It was thick, cream-colored, and had no return address. My heart stuttered, half hope, half dread, as I pulled it out and walked back into the house. I sat down on the couch, tore the flap carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of stationery. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was his. Her birth father. I knew it instantly, even though I'd never seen it before. It was too neat, too practiced, like someone trying too hard to make a good impression. The letter was short. 2 paragraphs. He wrote that he understood there had been tension between my daughter and me and that he hoped I'd give her some grace while she navigated this transitional period. He mentioned that she was doing well, that she was growing into a thoughtful, ambitious young woman, and that he was proud to know her. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. He said he was grateful for all I had done to prepare her for the world, and that sometimes stepping back can be the greatest act of love a parent can give. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, and placed it back in the envelope. Then I set it on the counter and stared at it like it might catch fire if I looked long enough. The arrogance of it. The implication that I was the one clinging, the one who needed to let go. The audacity to imply that my silence was somehow his idea of parental wisdom. It made my blood boil, but it also reminded me of something crucial. This man, this stranger with her eyes, didn't know me. He didn't know our history. He didn't know about the flu seasons I stayed up nursing her through or the college applications I helped her rewrite 10 times. He didn't know the weight of being the only parent in the room when life got hard. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch with the letter in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed, in and out, slow and steady, because I was done explaining myself, done justifying my boundaries to people who hadn't earned the right to challenge them. I'd made peace with the silence. I'd made peace with not being the one she chose to post about or toast to or text at midnight. And in that peace, there was grief, but also strength. I knew who I was. I knew what I'd given. And that had to be enough. Just before bed, my phone lit up with a text. It was from her. No apology. No, I miss you. Just 3 words. Hope you're okay. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. I considered every possible response. But in the end, I typed something simple. Something that didn't invite more pain, but didn't bend to it either. I am. I hope you are too. Then I put the phone down, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. The season began to shift not long after that final message. The leaves outside my window turned from their stubborn summer green to crisp ochres and reds, as if the world itself was shedding what no longer served it. I found myself drawn to the quiet more than ever, not the empty, echoing silence that used to haunt me, but the kind that offered space to breathe. I had stopped checking her social media by then, stopped expecting calls, stopped watching the door every time a car slowed in front of the house. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt in the way I had been before. Something inside me had settled, like a house after a storm. The windows were cracked, the roof needed repairs, but the foundation, my foundation, was still standing. And maybe, just maybe, stronger than before. Somewhere in the middle of October, I decided to take a trip. Nothing extravagant, just a few days upstate at a quiet bed and breakfast by the lake. I told no one. I packed light. Just books, comfortable clothes, and a journal I hadn't dared to write in for over a year. The drive was long but freeing, the kind of stretch of road where your thoughts drift in and out like radio static. I thought about the version of myself that used to orbit around her schedule. The woman who canceled vacations, rearranged work meetings, and woke up early on weekends just to catch 5 minutes of shared time. That woman had loved deeply, still did, but she had forgotten what it felt like to exist for herself. This trip, however simple, was my way of remembering. Each morning by the lake, I sat wrapped in a blanket with coffee warming my hands, watching the sun rise like it had something to prove. There was something sacred about that silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. I wrote for the first time in ages. Not about her, not about the heartbreak, but about who I was becoming. I wrote about resilience, about boundaries, about the terrifying, beautiful possibility that loving someone might mean letting go, not because you stop caring, but because you finally start caring about yourself. I didn't know if she would ever understand the choices I'd made. But for the first time, I wasn't writing in hopes that she would. I was writing just for me. On the last morning of my trip, I took a walk along the lake's edge. The air was sharp, but not cruel, the kind of cold that woke you up rather than chased you away. I passed a young mother with a little girl riding a tricycle, her pigtails bouncing with every push of her tiny feet. They were laughing about something I couldn't hear, but I felt it anyway. That weightless joy, the kind I remembered from long ago. For a split second, it made my throat tighten, not out of longing, but from the recognition that I'd lived that once. I'd had my time. I'd given my all. And no one could rewrite that truth, not even her. When I returned home, everything was just as I'd left it, but I wasn't. The living room didn't feel so hollow. The hallway where her pictures used to hang didn't feel like a gallery of mistakes. It felt like what it was, proof. Proof of a life lived in love, even if that love had changed forms. I didn't take the photos back out. I didn't rush to erase them either. I left them in the closet, tucked away, because I knew I could find them if I ever needed to. But I didn't need them to prove I was a mother. I knew I was. A few weeks later, I got a voicemail. I almost didn't listen. I saw her name, and my stomach dropped the same way it always did, like a reflex I hadn't outgrown. But I pressed play. Her voice was quiet, unsure. She said she didn't know what to say, only that she'd been thinking about me. She said she was sorry things had gotten so tense. She didn't apologize for the post or the accusations, not directly, but there was something softer in her voice. Something less guarded. She said, "I guess I just needed to figure out who I am. And I think I'm still figuring that out." Then a pause, and, "Hope you're okay." I didn't call back. Not out of spite, not out of pettiness, but because I didn't owe her the first word anymore. I'd given her a lifetime of first moves. Now, she would have to take the next one, fully, honestly, and without strings. I listened to that voicemail once more before deleting it. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need to replay it like a lifeline. I already had what I needed myself. Now, when people ask about her, I tell the truth. I say we're distant. That things are complicated. Some people press, some don't. The ones who do, I look at plainly and say, I raised her. I loved her. I still do. But I don't fund people who don't see me. And there's always a pause. Some people judge me. Others nod like they've lived something similar. Either way, I don't explain. I don't defend. I don't shrink. A few days ago, I sat out on the porch and watched the sunset, the kind that bleeds across the sky like spilled wine. I wrapped myself in that same blanket from the lake trip and thought about how far I'd come. I thought about the girl I raised, about the woman she's becoming, and about the mother I still am. I whispered into the dusk, "She knows where to find me, when she's ready." And I meant it. But until then, I'll be here. Whole, grounded, loving from a distance, and at peace. If you've ever had to draw a line with someone you raised, loved, or sacrificed everything for, only to be treated like an afterthought, you're not alone. It takes real strength to say, no more, especially when your heart still remembers who they used to be. But love without respect isn't love, it's obligation. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most powerful act of love you can give. If this story resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart and honor your boundaries. See you soon in the next story.